I am interviewing and finding people 20 years after the fact. And if we were able to mount a strong enough defense after 20 years that the jury came back in 19 minutes, come on, dude.
It wasn't even
Been able
close.
to do a lot. No.
It wasn't even
No.
close.
We thought it was a question, and they said no, they have a verdict. So in my mind, I'm like, oh boy, my stomach sank.
Today on our show, I have esteemed criminal defense attorney Takura Nyamfukudza, who is an extraordinary criminal defense attorney. He has a record of securing not guilty verdicts in huge murder cases, criminal sexual conduct cases, and has actually exonerated people after over 2 decades of being falsely imprisoned. Takura, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me,
You
brother.
are the man.
Thank you.
You are the
Thank you.
man.
Too kind. Too kind.
So we met back, I think I was before I was a lawyer.
Yes.
I was just so eager to be in the club that as a law student, I joined the criminal defense attorneys in Michigan. And I think they made an exception. They're like, well, you're not a lawyer, but you seem legit. And because I will never be a prosecutor.
Oh, no.
Never. It's not in me. Maybe if we get rid of all victimless crimes,
There you
maybe.
go.
But and we met there, and I just thought you were a badass, and you were telling me all your stories about. I'm like, man, like I hope I could be that good one day.
And look at you now.
I don't know. But you have so many great stories where you've stood up against power and for people and have righted wrongs and have fought for our Constitution. So really appreciate you. First, where do you work? What's your law firm? How can people find you?
Right. So Takura and Nyamfukudza, we have our main office in Okemos, Michigan. We have one in Grand Rapids also, but we go all over the state. I've been as far north as Marquette and all the way down to Hillsdale. And you can go on our website, www.cndefenders.com. So CN, our names, Takura Nyamfukudza Defenders, because that's what we do.com.
That's what you do.
That's right.
Now, where are you from? You got this awesome accent.
I was born in Zimbabwe. I came to the U.S. when I was 16. And after being here for 2 years, I enlisted in the Army, and I served 12 years in the U.S. Army.
So you fought for the United States for 12 years.
Yes, so I protected the Constitution with the rifle. Now I do it with a pen.
Did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer, or was there a moment that you're like, hey, I want to go from the rifle to the pen?
You know, honestly, for me, it was a process of elimination. I did not like math. And I started initially in biochemistry, and I couldn't stand that stuff. So I went and spoke with a guidance counselor. She said, these are the course descriptions. When I saw criminal justice, I said, that was it. So I was glad that I went the medical route first because I knew what I did not want to do. And once I started down the criminal justice path, I mean, I had that fire in my belly, and I knew I wasn't going anywhere, any other direction.
I kind of have a similar story. I was a accounting major.
Ooh.
I was almost done. Like I can't do this.
Right.
I want to be fighting the government. Can't get enough. Now I want to just jump into the first case that I'd like to talk about. So you exonerated somebody after they were imprisoned for 26 years.
26 long years.
So can you share that person's name? Is that okay?
Yes. Lucino Hamilton. He's on the National Registry of Exonerations, and we started representing him after he'd been imprisoned for 20 years. He was accused of murdering his foster mother, actually his mother, because she was the person he was closest to, who taught him all the things that you imagine a mother would. The Detroit Police Department manufactured witnesses. And Lucino is just one of several other people who, in that same year, were released based on the false testimony of this one individual.
Now, is this somebody, did he say he was innocent from the beginning?
Yes, he did. And for people who are familiar with the location, with Detroit, 1300 Bobion is a place where you're not supposed to spend a very long time. But this individual was in there for 4 years. So this person isn't a priest, a counselor, or anything. But all these people were coming off the street and confessing details of these crimes. And Detroit was a particular squad of homicide detectives. They went and found other witnesses, had them sign their names to statements. Quid pro quo. You're in here for a probation violation. If we need you and you testify, we'll put in a good word. And of course, people were not knowing Lucino or these other people. Of course, they signed their names. But they manufactured witnesses at the end of the day.
So this was a case where there was a jailhouse snitch used.
Yes.
But it was a false jailhouse snitch.
Correct.
And what did he actually say to the police about your client?
It's preposterous. He says that, again, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but having lived the case for so long, there's a lot to share. But essentially, he says that Lucino comes in, not having met this individual. It's one thing if he says, oh, I knew him from the block or he's my cousin, but he came in, he confided in me, told me all these details about the crime, and that is a lot of what they used at the trial. So he unfortunately lost at the first trial. But again, when they put their fingers on the scales of justice and manufacture stuff, and perhaps this certainly doesn't justify it, but Lucino's mother was a beloved middle school teacher. So perhaps they felt a lot of pressure and felt they had to close it. And because Lucino had a criminal history, I guess he was an easy target for them. But yeah, this dude says, he came in, he told me all these details, and so he told me he did it.
It's terrifying that, you're not the first attorney we've had on the show that it's that the government will just want to close a case, and they check their box, they literally close a file, and they don't understand or care that there's a real human being that's being locked in a cage forever falsely.
And here's the thing. The police officers, who were detectives and so on, these folks rose through the ranks. So a lot of the people who we saw in these reports from 20 years prior were still there. But now they are, of course, in much loftier positions. So the incentive for them to go back and do the right thing is what? Zero. Right? So, these folks and prosecutors. But anyway, it was a soup sandwich. I could talk about this case alone just for a long time, and I feel myself getting amped up.
So you had 2 trials on this.
So we didn't represent him on the first one.
That's only the second one.
Fortunately, we didn't actually have to go to trial. In the 6 years that we represented him, I spent a lot of time in offices interviewing witnesses in the event that we had to go to trial. So we were trial ready, but ultimately a pea-sized amount of DNA, which they had all along. They were pushing back. Oh, no, we don't have it. Doesn't exist. Ultimately, it was uncovered. They had it all along, and it showed that she had defensive marks, and there was DNA underneath her fingernails. It didn't belong to Lucino, and all along, they were telling a different story from when we started in the particular year until the very end. So ultimately, that DNA, which they had all along, they'd been denying.
How did you determine that the snitch was not credible? Like, it sounds like you had to figure that out and do some detective work to realize that this person wasn't telling the truth.
So first of all, where the person was. You're not supposed to be in that location for 4 years. This person had multiple aliases.
When you said 1,300.
Beaubien.
So what is that? We have people that watch around the country.
Right. So if you're arrested wherever you live, you may have a lockup. Say, people fight downtown. You're arrested by the local police, and then you may ultimately go to the county jail, right, where you get booked. So it's just a temporary place where within the few hours that they're allowed to hold you without charging you, where you're supposed to stay. So
it's jail.
Correct.
That's what I want people.
Yes, it's a jail.
It's a jail.
Yes.
It's a jail, and it's supposed to be for a temporary amount of time, and he was there for 4 years.
Correct.
That is insane.
And his name kept popping up on many people's cases. So, and again, he had no connection to these people whose cases he was popping up. So why are they admitting all of this? It's crazy.
So this guy, it just got nollie prossed. The case got dismissed without you going to trial.
So, yes. In the long and short, yes, that's the short answer. Yes.
Was there ever any consequences for any of the other wrongdoers? Is there consequences for the police, for lying, for manufacturing witnesses? How about this witness? I mean, didn't he commit perjury? I mean, isn't that a felony?
Yes, particularly on a capital case. Capital meaning,
death, maximum or death penalty.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So this person, by the time we got on the case, we didn't know where he was, but it seemed like he just walked out the door. Like they opened up the door, said, "See you later. Thanks for helping us." So we don't know where this person is. He may have died by the time we got on the case, but we don't know. Now, of course, upon his release, WICA, the Wrongful Incarceration Compensation Act, no amount of money can make up for that amount of time, or any amount of time, right? But he got to sue the Detroit Police Department and some of the detectives who were involved. But again, that's civil. That's a civil recovery. So certainly not the consequences that I think would have been appropriate. And I won't say on
maybe
here.
Something like an eye for an eye.
There you have it.
Which isn't always the right thing to do. But in certain circumstances, yes, I think if you wrongfully put somebody in prison for any amount of time, or wrongfully accuse or give false testimony, I think you should have to sit in that person's shoes and suffer what they did.
And it's one thing to say, "Oh, I don't remember," to perhaps not do your job properly, but when you make something up,
yes, and
that is what sends somebody away, it is so offensive. Yes.
Are those officers still working there in Detroit?
Some of them, like I said, have risen through the ranks. And before we got Lucino released, again, held some very lofty positions. So when we got Lucino released, some of them some passed away, and one at a deposition recently said she would not have done anything differently. But again, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. This is a case, of course, that means a lot to me. And
did you ever see your client after being let back into society?
Yes. So on the day that he got released, this was during the height of the pandemic. So only 2 people.
What a time to be released into. So he's from the 1990s, early 1990s to everyone's wearing a mask and on a smartphone.
That's right. I brought him a new pair of shoes so that those black ones that they wear when they're in MDOC, Michigan Department of Corrections, right? He took those off like Cinderella, right? I put on the new shoes, and I taught him how to send his first text. I took him for a meal, got him a haircut, and so only 2 people were allowed, right, because of the restrictions that were in place at the time. So myself and my business partner, Mary Chartier, that hug that he gave Mary and then that he gave me, that was the first time he'd hugged another human being in the 26 years that he'd been incarcerated. Because you're not going around hugging people, right, in prison. Right. So that was his first hug in 26 years. And now, cars are talking to you, phones are talking, cars are backing themselves up. Yeah. So his life was essentially on pause. He comes back out to this new world, and even absent the pandemic, I mean, it was just, I don't want to curse, but it was a completely different world.
How much money did he get?
So, a little bit over $1 million.
That's it?
But that's
a little over $1 million?
Yes.
That doesn't go very far.
Right.
For 26 years, how about 26 million?
But still, even that, because understand, a lot of his friends and family, right? They have their own families, right? 26 years, people who were kids when he went in are adults. And so when I was deployed, I can tell you, just for like a year and a half at a time, it was not easy to assimilate and become a civilian again. And that's just a year. And I raised my hand, right? I did that voluntarily. 26 years? No comparison.
Now, you had another similar case. Well, I guess similar meaning another exoneration.
Yes.
With a Dennis Tomasic.
Yes.
And tell me about that one.
Oh, boy. So, young man who he got in trouble a lot at school. So he gets caught stealing out of a teacher's purse. And it's on camera. And until he's told, hey, we saw you on camera, he's denying it. No, I didn't take anything out of the purse. They show him the video. And then he says, hey, guess what? The reason I've been acting up all these years is because I got molested by, and he couldn't even name Dennis. He lived down the street. And if the police had only done their job and gone to the place, first of all, Dennis had a job. The hours he worked, like any of us, he can only be in one of two places at a time. If the police had gone and just pulled his schedule, right, based on when they know these kids are at school and when he claims this stuff was happening, it was crazy. But anyway, he was represented by somebody else. This kid makes the claim. And remember, this is 10 years after. So he went to trial with somebody else, got convicted. So it went up and down, and ultimately the Michigan Supreme Court granted him a new trial, and then we retried that new case. So at this point, this is 20 years. People have died. The business has been shut down. Thankfully, his wife kept a lot of receipts and original items. So it was almost a reversal of how cases are, because I found people in Alaska, Florida, and I had 40 people ready to go to trial. Ultimately, we only called like 23 of them, but the jury came back in 19 minutes because it was so readily apparent to them that there was no foundation.
He waited 20 years for 20 minutes of a verdict.
Right.
Now, I 23 witnesses. I mean, is this a court-appointed case? Is this man paying you?
No. It was a retained case.
Because this is a huge trial.
Yes.
How long was the trial itself?
2 weeks. Now, so when we try cases, my business partner and I, she will take on the government's witnesses, and I put on the defense case almost always, because while I'm capable of, cross-examining typically female complainants, it doesn't, just doesn't look the same if I'm doing that. Anyhow, so I found all these folks, again, they're spread out all over the country. Some of them passed away, actually. It's an old case. So I found people in Alaska, Florida, some in Michigan, people who were children at the time are now adults, have their own children. So waves of witnesses, and we had tangible exhibits. That's the thing. It wasn't just based on people's memories and testimony. All stuff which Dennis's wife would have turned over and she had ready if the police had just come and done their job.
What was he actually charged with?
Criminal sexual conduct in the first degree. So
very serious.
Yes.
Up to life in prison.
Precisely. Yes. It doesn't get more serious than that.
And you say you bring up a point that if only the police had done their job, and there's a misconception that the people believe that police are there to protect and serve, and you laugh. The police are there to gather evidence for the government. That is it. They're not most of the time going to stop a crime from occurring. They're there to come after the fact and gather evidence. And some people, I have cases where, a family, I have a case right now where we have a mentally ill client, he's actually been deemed incompetent recently, but he took out a gun and he started shooting it at the house, and there's people in him and his mom and his grandma were inside. Very, very serious stuff, but he's completely out of his mind.
Right. And
they call the police thinking that they're just going to come and help him.
Oh, no.
And they're going to come. We just wanted him to get him help. And, they charge him with like 12 felonies from the situation. Yeah. They kick him out of the house. They make him have to live in a hotel, motel. He can barely fend for himself. And there's no mental health proper system, at least in the state of Michigan. And we have people that it's like the government comes and they make things far, far worse. And there's no proper mental health treatment. And then the lengths of time, how slow the wheels of justice turn. Your client had to wait, at least in the last one, he had 10 years and then 10 years again for 20 years for a 20-minute verdict.
Right.
And why do things take so long? Do you?
I know I'm going to answer that question, but I just have to add also one thing that was so offensive about Dennis's case is, I'll say it anyway. He was offered a no contest plea where they said, hey, we'll make it a misdemeanor. You just walk out of prison. But how would it look if we just dismissed the case, right? Even though they knew we had all this evidence showing, we showed them.
Yeah.
I drove down to the prosecutor's office, spent hours. Look at all of this. So, because this was evidence that wasn't going to change. How would it look? How would it look? It would look like you did the right thing.
Yes. The system, and I've been in a situation where judges, Judge Nicholson, Rochester Hills. Have you ever experienced this person?
I've heard, but
she's out of there, thank God. But she's no longer a judge anymore. But she should never have been a judge, and she treats people horrible, speaks people horrible, gives people wild sentences, shocking. Probably wasn't too happy with their life, but I had a client who had diagnosed schizophrenia, mental health issues. He was driving, and police pulled him over, and they decided, well, you took too much of your medication, so we're going to charge you with an OWI. They revoke it. She gives him some insanely high bond, and he's in there like over a month, which is like, Oakland County, right? Like your first DUI, you get probation, or maybe like a little sentence. He's in there over a month. They won't let him out because he's a danger to the community, right? But then she says, well, but if he pleads today, we'll let him out. And I'm like, well, I thought he was a danger to the community.
Right.
But as long as you can check your little box that you don't actually care if the community's in danger or not, because I would tend to agree if someone's a danger to the community, maybe they shouldn't be out, whether or not they're pleading or not. But they just needed to get their conviction, and they didn't care that you're keeping a mentally ill man in jail wrongfully with an insanely high bond his family couldn't afford. And that if he is as dangerous as you say, as long as you check your box, well, you're just going to let this person back out on the street today.
I've never wanted to be a judge. I'm not going to become a judge. But it seems to me that many of them, something about that position, perhaps they're elected, right? You may be appointed to serve out somebody's term, but ultimately you have to run again. So there isn't a doubt in my mind that they're probably thinking, oh boy, how would this read as a headline? But that should not be the basis. And if you don't have the intestinal fortitude, the spine to make decisions based on the law and to treat each person who comes in front of you as the individual they are, make decisions on an ad hoc basis, right? This business of policies, each person who comes before you is an individual. If you don't have the stones to do that, then you shouldn't be on the bench. But hey,
and they're supposed to be nonpartisan positions. So they say you're not supposed to be Republican or Democrat. That is nonpartisan. And for a judge's position, you want somebody who's even-minded, who's fair, who doesn't have a temper, who's logical. That if they go home and they got to fight with their wife or something, they're not going to start handing out years to citizens that don't deserve it. Now, police misconduct sounds like you've seen a lot of it.
More than. Yes, unfortunately, yes.
And one thing I talk about a lot on this show is that the government has no consequences for their actions. That the law doesn't treat them the same as you or I.
Qualified immunity, right?
Now, you brought up to me a case where there was a drug house, a suspected drug house, but the police basically made it up, and we got the whole thing dismissed.
So ultimately, and this is before the recreational use of marijuana here in Michigan, and I mean, a majority of the states, and I think even Washington D.C., there's recreational use of marijuana allowed now. So basically, during this time frame, a lot of people were saying, "Oh boy, I smell something funny coming out of Larry Lawless's house," and then the cops would check. "Oh boy, look at his board of water and light bill; it's astronomical. It wasn't that high, however long ago." So, person calls in a tip. The cops, go and search, but then they reverse engineer the search warrant, right? And now, thankfully, or I'll say fortunately, they recorded a video. This cop, he's coming in, and you can see other cops have been in there for quite some time. "Hey, how you doing?" They've been walking around. And then when you compare the timestamp on the video that they provided in discovery and compare it to the times that they put on an affidavit, and an affidavit is a what? A sworn statement, right? You're perpetrating a fraud on the court.
Yes.
So anyway.
It's perjury. It's fraud on the court.
Yes.
But nothing ever happens.
Oh, no, forget about it.
No big deal.
But basically, because we ran the preliminary examination, and a lot of prosecutors love to say, if you run this preliminary examination, we'll add more counts. I won't say what my response to that is. Anyhow, but you compare the time on the search warrant to the time on the video. That it's not like we went and uncovered it from somewhere. They provided it to us. And on the stand, this person insists, no, but sir, this timestamp.
But you have to have an incredible attention to detail to uncover this stuff. I mean, you sit there and you watch every single minute of every single video.
Oh, yes. And I listen, even when there are multiple officers, I listen to the recordings. I had a case in Wayne County where a client is pulled over, and it was on the body-worn camera of one of the two cops, the one in the passenger seat. You see him. So LEAN is the Law Enforcement Information Network. After they pull the client over, that's the seizure, right, where he said, "Oh, these police officers show of authority," he stops. So he's typing, and then you hear him talk to the driver, and they start making up the story for why they pulled him over. And that version that they were talking about is the one that ended up on the police report. And then ultimately the client drives off. So if I had only read the police report and not reviewed all of the recordings, I wouldn't have picked up on that. But there again, thankfully, judge had the stones to do the right thing. But when you have the evidence, the recording is their own body-worn camera, and it doesn't match what he wrote in his report, you don't have a choice. You've got to.
So I'm sure you know I'm running for U.S. Congress.
Yes.
And one thing that I believe should be nationwide law is that every single police officer should have to wear a body camera. I think that this would solve false convictions.
Yes.
It'll keep police officers safe from false accusations. You have women saying, "Oh, he touched me," right? I've seen those very same cases, and completely innocent police officers. And officers would also maybe act better knowing that they're being watched. And you watch the video where they press a little button and they turn off.
Mute.
They
It
mute
goes
like,
black.
Hold on, guys. Let's talk about this for a second.
Yeah, it goes. They come. Yeah.
You shouldn't be allowed to do that.
No.
And it's ridiculous. And we have the technology. Everyone has a phone in their pocket. This stuff's cheap. You can get a body camera for $50 on Amazon right now that straps to you. And the amount of money it would save the counties and the lawsuits and the false accusations and the innocent people.
Just last night, I saw a video of this woman had a dash cam. Somebody backed up into her, and then they got out, ooh. And then they filed a claim and said, "Hey, this person rear-ended me." But then they watched the video. Thank goodness she had that dash cam on.
Yes.
So same thing. It's good for everybody. It protects everyone.
Yes. You brought you mentioned something. You said I don't really want to talk about it, but if prosecutors punishing people for running their preliminary exam or going to trial. I've seen this a lot, and it's like, first of all, it's like, that's your job. And it's not like somebody's bringing up something false or wasting time. That I've seen that the government will punish people for simply exercising their right to jury trial, their right to a preliminary exam. And they say, if you challenge us, if you make us work, we will add so many felonies. And then what they can also do is dismiss and rewrite. So they pay a lawyer. You go to you run the preliminary exam, and they dismiss and rewrite. Or they go the day before preliminary exam, and they dismiss. And then the person's like, well, what's going on? They go, oh, well, they recharge them 6 months later. Case starts over. And there's no limit to that until a judge puts a stop to it. But I've seen them at least do it 3-4 times over on somebody.
And if I may, that happens frequently at the state level, but also at the federal level. When it comes time for sentencing, you get points off. It's called acceptance of responsibility, right? And listen, the feds give away time like it's Skittles. They don't play around. To hear somebody say, oh, I only got 100 months. Only got 100 months? But that's just because if you go to trial and lose, then you're looking at a much higher sentence. So they don't call it this. They'll deny that it is, but it's a trial penalty. It is baked into the sentencing guidelines, acceptance of responsibility. So anyway,
people listen to this podcast and like, how do you end up in federal court versus state court? So a lot of times I've had many cases where a county prosecutor, a local government started with it, but if there's a firearm involved, for example, because here in Michigan, we don't have any places that manufacture firearms on a large scale. So somebody could have a user amount of methamphetamine, whatever it is, but if there's a firearm involved at all, your goose is cooked. Right? So the feds can come say, okay, thank you, blankety blank county, we're taking over this here. Yes. But it could also be state charges, though.
Oh, yes.
I see it every day.
Yes.
And then I've also seen just like particular cases where, the feds come in and say, oh, I've had one where you had marijuana and a gun in your house. Yeah. And this guy got in a fight with his brother, and he was actually like a political activist too. And he got in a fight with his brother. The police come in and they say, well, you got this firearm in your house and weed. And you lied on your CPL application because you were smoking weed. And now it's a federal case, and he's sitting there with all this extra time. So that was my question. I just wanted to do you know how they decide? How they say, well, you are the lucky federal case with very state-level actions.
So So a lot of times, depending on what's hot, right? What's going on at the moment. So on the heels of the unfortunate shooting at MSU, many cases that involve firearms, which could have been handled at local level, were not, right? But that's because want to go on the news and say we're taking this seriously, and it gets a lot of clicks and makes people feel like they're safe. They want to. That's the tagline. So, but no, a lot of times if there's a firearm involved, or sometimes county prosecutors can even go to the feds and say, hey, we need your help with this. We don't have enough resources.
Yes.
And the feds then can deputize the local agents, give them their funds, and then not have their 3-letter agents have to go in. So, yeah, and for the local cops, that is a huge promotion. I'm a task force agent, and so, yeah.
Just thinking out loud here as well, but I think it should also be a federal law just protecting our Constitution that you can't add charges for simply exercising your constitutional rights.
Yes, agreed.
And it's
you
wrong.
won't hear
or there should be consequences. Like, okay, there should be maybe something where it's like, well, if you do add the charges and we win, maybe you should get paid.
I like your
Something
thinking.
like that. I don't know.
Let's tackle seizures too, right? Where they say, oh boy, just because you were driving, even though you didn't use the car in the actual commission of the act, or they take a house, or they take this cash.
You have to buy it back.
Right.
Buy back your own house.
Right.
Because it's too expensive to even fight. And it turns innocent until proven guilty on its head, and it turns the burden of proof on its head as well.
Oh, absolutely.
The government, instead of having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're guilty, you need to now prove
the money innocent.
That you're innocent, and by clear and convincing evidence. So you got to prove you didn't do something.
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of times people say, hey, you defense attorneys, you just complain. What are some solutions, right? Offer some fixes. So, again, we do a lot of work. We've thankfully managed to exonerate a lot of people, and actually some dogs that were on doggy death row. But
doggy death row.
Yes.
What is doggy death row?
So
dogs that have bitten people, allegedly.
So these dogs were accused of having killed some livestock.
Oh.
And we were able to show that it actually wasn't the dogs, just based on the types of bites and where they were.
Okay, but
actually it was
coyotes. A dog doesn't have a right to a lawyer.
No,
right?
No,
so how do you get a dog case like that?
So they were going to get euthanized, and these dogs belong to a veteran. So when I learned that, I was like, and it wasn't just a pet, right? He was dealing with PTSD. So these were pets that actually helped him work through that. So that was something that we felt we had the opportunity to help with.
And they were on doggy death row.
Yes, they were going to be euthanized because, if you have a dog that is running loose and chasing people down, you could just get a ticket for that. But if it actually bites more than one person, person sustains injury, and in that case where the livestock was killed, they were going to be euthanized. They disappeared, and then when we got that order revoked, they came back home. They found their way home. But so the National Registry for Exonerations, if you log on to that website, there's a counter, right, of the number of years that people have served cumulatively for crimes. Yes. So you can go on that website and see their names, the different crimes, and so on. And a lot of these things, for example, misidentification. We know that a lot of times when someone says, if you're panicked, right, in the middle of the night, somebody snatched my purse, if the police officer brings somebody to you and says, hey, is this the dude? What do you think the person's going to say? Absolutely. But an easy fix. So if they have 6 photographs of people who hopefully look similar enough that they're not an easy pick. So if one photograph is in color and the rest are in black and white, right? Or there's 5 Caucasians and 1 African American, duh. But it's almost common sense. But you should not have the same police officer who responded working. There should be 2 folders. Look at the photo one at a time. You move it away, because if the same officer who responded is the one showing the photographs, they're going to say, are you sure it's not that one? You want to spend a little more time on this?
Yeah.
So all it takes is just a little bit of time. You can pull photos from wherever it is, and 2 manila folders.
Right.
One at a time. And there aren't many police departments that say they don't have 2 officers. So that lineups, mistaken identity, especially across races, that is a leading cause of wrongful identification. So, just little fixes like that. And all it takes, again, manila folder and 2 officers, instead of having the same person who brings somebody up on the scene of the crime. Is this the person?
Yeah.
That's heavily suggestive. But again, there are a lot of other ones. And actually, if you go on our website, which I mentioned earlier, we did a talk about the leading causes of wrongful convictions and how to prevent so many.
Misidentification, and then DNA's got to be another big one.
Oh, absolutely.
Where people are wrongfully convicted and then freed eventually
Right.
due to DNA.
Right. And of course, unfortunately, police misconduct. But also, I hate to say this, but there are attorneys, whether it's prosecutors or defense attorneys, who don't do their job. There are prosecutors who think their job is to just simply obtain convictions. But with Dennis Tomasic, for example, if his first attorney had done half of what we did, because I shouldn't say chasing down, I am interviewing and finding people 20 years after the fact. And if we were able to mount a strong enough defense after 20 years that the jury came back in 19 minutes, come on, dude. You should have
It wasn't even
been able
close.
to do a lot. No.
It wasn't even close.
We thought it was a question, and they said, no, they have a verdict. So in my mind, I'm like, oh boy, my stomach sank.
I like quick verdicts are not guilties, in my experience.
Yeah.
But
if it was
I've
that
had
readily
the 20
apparent-
minutes. I've had the 15 minutes. I go, oh, that's not guilty.
Right. So,
Wow.
but if
What
that
does it
first
feel? What does it
attorney
feel
had done
like?
his job,
I mean, I've gotten some great, and I've had, when we met, I had 0 jury trials.
Right.
And now I've had my 35th.
yes.
So I'm
Yes.
cruising right along in my
Yes.
career, and it's epic, especially getting 4 out of 4, 6 out of 6,
a
not guilty.
litigator. You're actually litigating.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Not a plea bargain attorney trying cases. There's no. I'll tell you this. The lead up, of course, it takes a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's stressful, but once you're there, so I box. It's one thing to spar, but once you're in there mixing
Yeah.
it up, jousting with the government,
Oh, yeah.
right? And
I love it.
You're catching them in their lies. You're impeaching them. It's
I use a little humor,
Those
use a little
sweet words.
sarcasm.
Absolutely.
And when you're right, when you have an innocent client, I mean, it's easy.
Right.
It's easy to tell the story.
Right.
And the jury will often see through this stuff. I've never had an innocent person get convicted.
Yeah. So, but our job as defense attorneys is the only one in the Bill of Rights. We don't have a constitutional right to a dentist, a doctor, a plumber, or anyone
point.
else, but we are the Sixth Amendment, right? We breathe life into the Constitution. So I couldn't be more proud of the work we do.
Liberty's last line of defense.
That's right.
That's right. Well, cool. Takura, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're the man. Your stories are incredible. You do incredible work. You've saved the lives of lots of people, and you're continuing. You're going to have a long career defending the Constitution and getting people out of jail, and that just must be incredibly rewarding. You're doing God's work, and I sure as hell respect you and appreciate you.
Likewise. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Liberty Lawyer Podcast. If you enjoy this content, if you like hearing about victories over the government and us criminal defense attorneys sticking it to the man, please subscribe to this channel, like, and share. Also check me out on TikTok and Instagram as well. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Liberty Lawyer Podcast.